Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and I am joined today by a special guest, by Sporting News college football writer Bill Bender. Bill, thank you for so much for joining the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brian. It's great to be on.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to this. I've gotten a chance to know you over these last couple of years. I enjoy your work very much. I said on one of our recent podcasts, you're one of the few college football writers I actually read with any sort of regularity. Had a chance to meet you. We've talked ball a lot, and I really wanted to get you on the show because I want to get your perspective on the inevitability of the college football playoff expanding to 8 teams, and then get your opinion on if it should or shouldn't, and then get your opinion on if you were the college football king and you ruled college football, what would the 8-team playoff, if we're going to accept the inevitability of it, what would it look like? So that is going to be the topic of today's conversation. And so let's just dive right in, Bill. And first, I want to get your opinion on it. Do you even think do you think it's good for college football that it is eventually going to expand to an 8-team playoff?
That's a loaded – good is such a weird word for this because I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen. Will I be a fan of it? Probably not. I'm one of those people. I kind of loosely defend the BCS in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the BCS more often than not did get the top 2 teams when we went to 4. I mean, that's the first question that comes to mind, Brian. In the years that we've had this playoff, has there been a flagrant miss in the playoff? And I don't think there has been, other than if you're a UCF or a TCU or a Baylor.
Yeah, I
don't think they've missed. So why the rush to expand when we're dealing with player safety and all those NIL issues? I mean, if they're going to make it about the money, yeah, they'll end up expanding.
Mm-hmm. And that's the only reason to expand, in my opinion, is to do it, is because it's there. I think college football is looking at this, Bill, and saying we're making a killing financially on the college football playoff, just making an absolute killing. And I believe there's a lot of short-sighted and narrow-focused people that run college football, whether it be presidents or people in the NCAA, and they say, well, if we expand it and add, 4 more games, think about how much money we could make it, without having the foresight to understand how does this going to impact the regular season, and how is this going to cheapen the regular season. And I think of an argument that I've made is the 2018 Notre Dame or Purdue Ohio State game, the 2017 Iowa Ohio State games that were played, I believe both played in October, completely shook up the college football playoff landscape. You go to an 18 playoff, and all of a sudden that game doesn't matter as much anymore. Ohio State and Michigan, how many years when they were good, if we had a 14 playoff, would that game have determined who's in the playoff? Well, now if they're both really good, they're both going to be in the playoff. And there's going to be years, and we're going to go through some of these, where they both would have made it despite the fact Ohio State dominates them every year. So to me, it's all about money, and I'm unfortunately, I think that they're going to do it in a way where it's just going to be an expansion of the playoff, and it's not going to have the protections that I think are needed to protect the game. And so that's the unfortunate aspect of this. But to your point, I would say the only miss that you could argue that they've had was a year in which the team that shouldn't have got in, the argument is, won the title, and that was 2014 with Ohio State and TCU. I even kind of give that a pass. To me, it was a miss simply because of the manner in which they leaped Ohio State ahead of TCU and then dropped TCU behind Baylor, even though TCU had already lost to Baylor. TCU wins 55-3 over Iowa State and drops 2 spots. I just thought that was a bad look, but obviously Ohio State made them look good by going out and winning the national title that year.
They did, and that's one of those years where that was the first year of the playoff. It created a ton of excitement by them getting Alabama. You brought up Michigan, Ohio State in the regular season. I mean, the 2 games that stick out to me, one was it's the best of both worlds almost. Like in 2006, when Michigan and Ohio State were both 1-2, and I believe they both ran into – no, they didn't both play Notre Dame. Michigan played Notre Dame that year. They were the 2 best teams in the country. They play a regular season game, and it cost Michigan not in the BCS championship game. In 2016, they play this double overtime thriller that really turned the tide and that momentum way in Ohio State's favor, quite honestly. And Michigan lost that game, and the consequence was you didn't go to the 14 playoff. The Big Ten's had some controversy through this whole deal. Notre Dame gets caught up in those conversations, although this year, even this year, you could argue. But I think the 14 playoff, once you get past 4, we'll you know how it is in this sport, Brian. We'll spend the whole time arguing about who's number 7, 8, and 9 once we go to 8.
That's the thing, Bill, is when you get to that level, is there a cutoff where all of a sudden you say, well, this team is okay, yeah, we're accepting 8. There's no debate with who number 9 is. I mean, could you name me a year, and this is a rhetorical question because I know what your answer is going to be. Can you name me a year where there was a 7th or an 8th team that legitimately had an argument to make the college football playoff?
No. I mean, not in this current format. I mean, do we need to see LSU beat – I don't know. You probably have these. I know you have these slides queued up. We didn't.
Yeah. So let's take. Well, we'll get into that when we go over your proposal. It'll make a lot more sense. But that's the whole thing. Is there's rarely been a year where you could argue 7 or 8 teams deserve to be in or would have had an impact. So why are we adding that game when it's some of the proposal, play a home game and all these kind of things. It's like, so, I mean, do we really want to see UCF against number 1 Alabama or number 1 Clemson? I mean, is that really going to be a game that is going to draw a ton of attention? There's all types of things. So before we kind of get down too much of this rabbit hole, Bill, because I think we can discuss some of this stuff within the framework of what our proposals are going to be, and it'll kind of make our points for us. Let's do this. So I have been given the power to anoint Bill Bender the king of college football. Okay. And I've dictated to you that, Bill, I want an 18 playoff. Okay. That's what I want. It's up to you to say how it's going to go. And so you've got to lay out for your proposal of what you would do and why you would do it that way in regards to the proper way, in your view, to create an 18 playoff in college football.
Okay, so we discussed this before I came on. Money's not an object, correct? Because I'm not going to make you more money with my plan. I'm sorry, because mine is to ditch the conference championship games. I mean, think about it. Big Ten conference championship game last year. What was the point of that game other than to get Ohio State in the playoff? What is the point of the now the ACC before Notre Dame comes in last year? What was the point of the ACC championship game? To get Clemson through? Last year, they finally had one where there's a consequence for winning. There's a consequence for losing. So I think that is very interesting. I would end the regular season where you're at. I would seed them 1 through 8. Even if you want to do it by a computer, committee, whatever. So you have 1 through 8 seated at the end of the regular season. We used to determine the Big Ten champion like that. So that's my first part. I need them on campus in the first round. I need Notre Dame at Boise. I need Notre Dame at UCF in the first round. I need something like that. I need those kind of games. And then we go from there. Then we go play the normal semifinals in a championship game. I don't know. Oh, and that was the other thing. And you don't have to be a Power 5 conference champion to get in. Okay. So UCLA could go 9-3. It doesn't mean you get a spot. So those are kind of they're never going to happen because it's, antitrust and those kind of things. But if you really want the best 8 teams, that's the way to do it.
I like the fact that you did not give a conference winner an automatic bid. I think that is absolutely just a horrible idea. I unfortunately think it is going to happen, but I think that's a horrible idea because most years there's at least one Power 5 conference, sometimes 2, where the conference winner doesn't even – I mean, there's not a team in that league. The Pac-12 has had several years like this where their winner should not be sniffing the playoff.
Question?
Yeah, shoot.
So, as an OU alum, and OU in my book is Ohio University. It's not Oklahoma. I'm a MAC grad. Is it okay that we say some years, hey, the Group of 5 school, you don't have to, it's worthy of an 18 playoff? Say
that again?
So some years, can we block the Group of 5 out? That's under my plan. You can.
Yes. Can say, well, I think we should take the 8 best teams.
Yeah, we're not taking a 10-2 Navy American Athletic Conference.
Right.
No disrespect to Navy. Probably it was the wrong school.
Yeah, I think it was 2018. The best Group of 5 program was Memphis, and they wouldn't have got in. This year, Cincinnati was ranked 8th. They would have got in. Right. I think it was 2020 2017 or maybe it's 2018. Yes, it's 2019 that Memphis would have gone in as the number 17 team. That was the team that played Penn State in the Cotton Bowl. They were the highest ranked group of 5 team, I believe. This year, Cincinnati would have got in. In 2018, UCF would have got in. Other years, the best group of 5 team would have been a 15 to 20 ranked team. And so basically you might as well just give Alabama a bye at that point in time. If that team earns it and they are a top 8 team, then give them their shot. But this year, like Coastal Carolina, if you just said, okay, well, they were undefeated. I mean, does anybody really want to see Bama versus Coastal Carolina? I don't. Does anyone want to see Bama versus Cincinnati when it's Cincinnati team that's gone 12-0 and played some good games? Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that, but they've got to earn their way in by being 12-0 and maybe playing an out-of-conference team and earn it that way. And that's the only way I get it in. I just don't think that we need to force the group of 5 into this conversation. You know what I'd like to do, honestly, Bills? I wouldn't mind seeing a 2 playoffs and have one for the Power 5 and one for the group of 5. And so you have your top 4. Yeah, you have your top 4 in the Power 5. You have because we actually used to see this at the 1AA level. I don't know if they still have it or not, but when I coached at Duquesne University, we won a national championship. We were the 1AA mid-major national champs. We got rings and everything. And then there was a 1AA team that won it that went to the playoff. There was two different titles. So I mean, maybe we could do something like that, but I just don't think automatic bids are a good idea. I don't think they're good for the game because remember the year that who was it? Wake Forest won the ACC one year.
Right.
UConn won it with an 8-4 record when the Big East was considered a major conference. We don't need that. If you're one of the 8 best teams, then you get in. If not, then you don't get in.
So everybody's 18 plan says I have 5 Power 5 champions, a group of 5 champion, and then 2 at-larges. That's pretty much everybody's standard plan. So what's going to happen there when you have a year where LSU, Alabama, and Auburn are all loaded, and one of them gets left out because 3-loss USC gets in the tournament?
Exactly.
And
or a 9-3 Memphis team gets into the tournament, or 10-2 Navy gets into the tournament.
And Notre Dame feels the brunt of that every year, but that's Notre Dame. When they've got in the playoff, they've earned it. I mean, they either, what I mean.
But Notre Dame plays there are a lot of years where Notre Dame actually plays more Power 5 games, more Power 5 regular season opponents than a lot of the Power 5 conference winners, because they play so many MAC schools and 1AA schools and all those other kind of things, where Notre Dame plays at least 10 Power 5 teams almost on a yearly basis. That doesn't happen at Alabama. They'll play 10. Clemson will play 10. So that's a different argument, whereas Navy may play 1. UCF may play 1. Sometimes they don't play any. So it's a completely different argument. But, there's years Navy would have got in having got blitzed by Notre Dame in the regular season.
Right.
But they were the best group of 5 team. So I think that needs to be out of the conversation. I just don't think if the goal is, and this is what they say, right? The goal is to expand the playoff. Why? What's the argument for it? They say because, there's just, when you look at the teams like Georgia got left out, Kirk Herbstreit was on that kick that one year when a 2-loss Georgia team was one of the best teams. Oh, it's one of the best rosters. Based on what? Recruiting rankings? They lost 2 games. They got blasted by LSU. They should have been in the playoff, but that's the argument, right? So if we're going to go with the argument of, well, more than 4 teams deserve a shot, then why are we giving automatic bids? Why is a group of 5 team? They're not deserving of it unless they, just because they're the best group of 5 team. If they're one of the 8 best, put them in. I would have loved to see Cincinnati. And I think Cincinnati vindicated themselves by giving Georgia everything they can handle in a bowl game. And there are some of those UCF teams could have probably given the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed a game for a while. I believe they had some of those teams under Scott Frost. But if they're one of the 8 best, and give them that shot. But the whole notion of you're going to get 6 of those 8 spots are going to be locked up just because you won your league, when there's really, to me, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think that's going to hurt the game too, because what's your incentive at that point in time for doing anything out of your conference? I mean, there's none.
Right. And expansion, here's the other thing, and this is the call for expansion, in my opinion, is born out of the fact that we're dealing with a 3-team sport right now. Going to 8, some people like to make the argument, well, if you go to 8, more kids will go to the playoff, and Alabama, it'll change Alabama, it'll change Clemson. It's not going to change Ohio State and Columbus, Brian. It's not going to change the fact that Ohio State has just dominated in this part of the country for a long time. And I made this point after the playoff last year, where statistically speaking, over the last, I think it's 3 or 4 years, Notre Dame has the 4th in college football. So what we're doing is we're throwing a dart at that 4th team. We're throwing it at Notre Dame or Oklahoma every other year. You could make a case. Like when I do my preseason projections for next year, what's it going to say? Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and I'll probably throw the dart at Oklahoma this time because of what they got coming back on offense. So does an 8-team playoff change that?
No,
not in my opinion, because
Alabama gets one more warm-up game before the semifinal, and that's a great point, Bill, because we haven't even seen all 4 of the playoff teams be competitive. I mean, go back to Florida State in 2014. The only reason they got in is because they played a terrible schedule that year, and they dominated. And when the ACC was really weak, everybody knew they weren't a great team that year. Notre Dame almost beat them. Notre Dame fell apart late in the year, and then Oregon embarrassed them. 2015, Michigan State gets in. They get shut out 38-0. 2016, Washington gets in. Their defense held their own, but their offense, I mean, they didn't belong on that field.
Right.
And so we've seen Notre Dame's been in twice and hasn't been competitive in either game.
Well,
Ohio State got in one year and got beat 31-0.
To me, Notre Dame belonged in the playoff last year. They just got caught in a first, when they were able to play their game for a minute, it was okay. But they got caught in that first quarter storm that
I think Notre Dame belonged both times, and Notre Dame was more competitive in 2018. My point is that there's really only been 2 to 3 teams on a yearly basis that are actual title contenders. I'm not contending that Notre Dame didn't deserve to be in the playoff. I think Michigan State deserved to be in the playoff under the current rules. Florida State deserved to be in the playoff under the current rules, but they weren't going to win the title that year in 2014. They were a mess. They just were way more talented than everybody else. That's where, 2017 Clemson, anyone that watched that team knew they weren't going to win the title that year. That was not the same Clemson team that won the title the year before without Deshaun Watson. They lost a lot of players. They were just dominating and beating up in the ACC. And honestly, that was a team that lost to 4-8 Syracuse. They weren't going to win it that year. There's been 2 to 3 teams at most. I think the only year that I felt, and the interesting thing is 2017 is the closest year you could, if you're a believer in Clemson, which I wasn't, that would be the one year where I felt like maybe there were 4 teams that had a chance to win, because I thought that Oklahoma team in 2017 would have beat Alabama. I truly believe that. That was Alabama, to me's worst title team. That was one of the best coaching jobs that Nick Saban did that year with that team, because they were very young in a lot of spots, and they kind of caught a break by playing another SEC team that does the same stuff they do in the title game. And to me, that Oklahoma team would have beat Alabama. I know it's a little bit of a controversial take, but that was a really good Oklahoma team.
No, I saw them beat Ohio State that year.
Yeah, convincingly in Columbus,
and that doesn't happen often, as you know. You don't. How many teams going there? So I guess the big question is for college football is, at what point do they give in to that 8-team outcry? They will eventually. The school presidents will. My plan, I realize, isn't going to happen, but that's how I would do it, because I just believe in this. I do. Some people get upset with this idea of the sanctity of the regular season, but that's why college football is what it is. It's not the NFL. I'm a Packers fan. The Packers can lose to the Lions in week 3. It's cool. They're going to do their thing in December. You want all of those games to matter. You want them. And can you imagine we get in a scenario where, and it's been close a few years, like Alabama, it's like you could sit some starters for that game and lose one, probably still get
100%.
And that would start happening. People wouldn't like that. And
you're going to get 3 lost teams into the playoff as well. That would have happened at least twice so far, that a 3-loss team would have been in the college football playoff.
And that's my 2 absolute rules for the playoff at this point are, 3: be from a Power 5 conference or Notre Dame, go undefeated, and don't lose twice. 2-loss team hasn't made the playoff. And that's because the college football regular season matters. And I like that it matters. And I like that there's a penalty. Like Herb Street, like you said, Herb Street and others will always say in November, we'll sit here and say, well, Georgia's hot. or Oklahoma's hot. Well, don't lose twice.
Hey,
and that's
the perfect example. The 2016 USC team could have played with anybody in November and in the postseason.
Correct.
Anybody. They lost 3 games. They got blown out by Bama. They got beat by Stanford and Utah, and then made a quarterback switch. But that's September matters, and that's the thing that frustrates me with ESPN a lot. Is it's like they just want to ignore the first half of the season. I mean, there were literally people in 2018 saying that Michigan with 1 loss to Notre Dame should have been in the college football playoff over Notre Dame.
Right.
And undefeated. Now, if Notre Dame would have lost a game and their records would have been identical, then you take the overall resume into consideration, and I understand that. But that's just some of the absurdity we get with this. I think one of the worst proposals I've seen is the 16 playoff. And then the top 2 seeds get a bye week. Because the whole frustration is people are frustrated that the top 2 or 3 teams are dominating. Now you're going to give them a bye and make the other teams kind of beat each other up a week before while they sit at home scouting. I mean, that to me would be a terrible one, especially if they do conference tie-ins with that. That needs to just be completely eliminated. Bill, I want to share my proposal. Well, let's actually first, before we get to yours, let's look at this is what the playoffs would have looked like under your proposal. So we'll start with 2014. This is what the 18 playoffs would have looked like to kind of back up our point. So this is the 2014 season, the 2015 playoff.
We get a TCU Baylor rematch on the field.
That's right. And in a lot of these, Bill, we end up getting conference title games. And that's a question that I wanted to ask you before we move on to my proposal. This is 2015. Get over to that. 2015 would have been Clemson Notre Dame rematch. That would have been interesting.
Is that the bring your own guts year? So
that is the year they won in the monsoon. Now, I would have loved to have seen game 2, Alabama versus Christian McCaffrey Stanford team. That Stanford team was playing Alabama would have beat them. That would have been a fun game to watch. Oklahoma, Ohio State, and then there we go. Big Ten title game still happens that year, but now it happens in the playoff.
Yeah, we get that same moment. We're good.
Right, 2016. Yep. These are exciting games. Alabama, Ohio, Colorado, Ohio State, Penn State rematch. Remember, that was the year that Penn State beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten championship. But because Michigan beat them by 39 in the regular season, they didn't make the playoff. Clemson versus Wisconsin in a really sexy Washington versus Michigan game.
For that Michigan game, you get that instead of Michigan losing to Florida State.
There you go.
You can settle for that one.
2017, Colorado, this would have been it. Yep. This would have been it. Yeah, that was the year that under I forget his name, the guy that came from San Jose State. They lost the Pac-12 title game that year. They were 10-win team. They lost the Pac-12 title game to Washington. McIntyre,
we can watch Alabama beat Colorado by 50. That's fine.
That would have. I mean, who wants to see that? I mean, that's who wants to see that. 2017, it's Clemson, Ohio State would have been a big name rivalry. I don't know if Ohio State would have had much of a shot that game. Auburn, Miami. That was a very mediocre Miami team, although they didn't look like that when they played Notre Dame. Oklahoma, Georgia, that would have been a rematch, or we saw that game. That's the game that. And now again, these rankings are based on pre-conference championship games.
Right.
So obviously, Georgia beat Auburn, which knocked Auburn below Alabama when we actually got to the college football playoff in 2017. But this is before the SEC title game, so that's why Alabama's 5 against Wisconsin.
And the game matters.
That's right.
Auburn beating Georgia matters. That's big.
That's right. And then 2018. Oh, right. Because now, to your point, this is what I like about this, Bill, because Auburn handles its business in the regular season, and because there's a conference title game, they have to do a rematch. Well, not many teams are going to win rematches, as Notre Dame fans found out this year with Clemson. So now nobody's really talking as much about the November 7 win because now they have to do a rematch in the ACC title game, and that's another reason that I kind of like your idea. It's not going to happen, but I'd like your idea of no SEC title game or conference title game. 2008 playoff. This would have been to me one of the best. This is one of the few years where I thought this would create a lot of good matchups.
These ratings on this playoff are off the charts.
They would have been phenomenal.
Off the charts.
3 of those games would have been some of the most watched games we'd ever seen. Notre Dame, Ohio State in a playoff game, Alabama, UCF, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Clemson and Michigan still would have got a lot of play because, I mean, have those teams ever played each other? Be a good question to find out.
No, well, and here's the thing, too. So go back to that one real quick. this is the year that Ohio State just stomped Michigan, right? It's
Crushed
Urban
them.
Meyer crushed them in Columbus. But if you're Michigan, you get crushed in that game, and at least you're able to get back up. Hey, they might have got crushed by Clemson too.
Well, they lost to 2 of these teams. That's
Right.
my issue with the expanded college football playoff. Michigan has already had their chance to stake their claim to be a title contender, and they got beat by Notre Dame, and they got crushed by Ohio State.
Notre Dame in the opener. They
That's
got
right.
bookend road losses, but they still get in. And but then you can so maybe if we're doing this by a computer or a committee, they can push somebody around. But I think it sticks to me because then you get Clemson in that matchup. You get Alabama and UCF. They need to schedule each other anyway.
Yes.
And then
that would have been a great playoff. One of the few that I've actually liked. Most of these I just don't like most of these first. Huh?
This is Kyler versus Georgia. That's fun.
Oh, yeah, right? 2018. Yeah, because then it would have been Kyler versus Jake Fromm, rematch of the year before. Because again, we had Georgia, Oklahoma the year before, which actually happened. And then you get another Georgia, Oklahoma. So Kyler against I keep thinking Kyler played for Georgia, but against Jake Fromm rematch, sophomore Jake Fromm. That would have been this would have been a good one. This one, not so much.
No, this would have been ugly. LSU would have crushed Baylor.
And this is what you get when you go to 8. There's the occasional year where there's some good teams, but Ohio State, Wisconsin's the de facto Big Ten title game. And it's a rematch of a game that Ohio State crushed Wisconsin in the regular season in the rain. LSU, Baylor, blowout. Clemson, Oklahoma would not have been competitive. It would have looked a little bit like the LSU Oklahoma game that year. And who wanted to watch? Who wants to watch Georgia, Utah?
It does give Georgia, like most people that year felt like Georgia was better than Oklahoma. At least this validates that on some level. You get Georgia, they get to get in, but they did get stomped by LSU too. I mean, this one was some years, and it's to your point where there's only 2 or 3 teams. I mean, this was a year where there were only 3 teams capable. Well, and Alabama's down, but the Tua injury knocked them out. There were only 3 teams capable.
Right. But you know what? Here's my thing with Georgia. This was the argument that I made. Everybody talk about, Georgia should have got in. They were better than Oklahoma. Well, then don't lose at home to South Carolina.
Right.
That was South Carolina won 4-8. What that was your 40th birthday?
I don't remember much of that game is what I'm trying to tell you. Because I took a rare Saturday off and they let me turn 40 and I vaguely remember them losing.
Well, they lost at home to a 4-8 South Carolina team.
Right.
That's the whole point. Don't lose at home and then you got blasted by LSU. You had your chance on the field for 12 weeks to prove it, and you didn't get it done. So that's the thing. And I'm not going to do this year, Bill, because this year was just way too screwy. Just with some teams playing 6, 7, 8 games, it wouldn't have mattered. But that gives us a good idea of what it was. Let me ask you this one question, Bill. I have 2 questions about your proposal before we move on to mine. Number one is, would you be more open to a conference title game if they got rid of one regular season? So remember, we used to only play 11 regular season games.
Right.
If they dropped a regular season game, so let's say every conference dropped one regular season game. So maybe the teams that played 9 would drop to 8.
I don't care what your question is. Let's just do that.
Okay, so you'd be okay going 11 regular season 11. Plus the conference title game?
Look, that's fine.
Okay. Now, here's the other question is, how does that impact? See, I think you made the point that this is how the Big Ten used to decide their winners. But back then you played everybody. For a long time, the Big Ten, you could feel good about the winner of the Big Ten because everybody had to play everybody.
Right.
With the conferences being 12 to 14 teams, do you think that makes it a little bit tougher to really have a legitimate decider of who the best team is? Because not everybody plays everybody.
Right. And for those of us, you and I don't know if your listeners know, I grew up in Ohio. I'm a Central Ohio Catholic school kid. So I have these daydreams about Notre Dame joining the Big Ten, which will never happen. But the problem with the Big Ten, as Notre Dame fans would be quick to point out, why would we join a conference to join the Big Ten West? Why would you come in a conference and play Wisconsin and Nebraska and that? So, yeah, I think the flaw in my plan is just that, right? That you want a true conference champion. I don't even know. But it speaks to a larger point that Ohio State, we don't learn anything watching them play, right? Rutgers and Maryland every year, but
Right.
every conference would have that problem. So yeah, you're so far, and I think you're selling me your plan. So far, we're good. I'm good with 11. I'm good with your conference championship. So we're legitimate there. So what's next?
So for me, here's my proposal. I've tried to think of how can you create an expanded playoff without expanding the actual playoff. What I mean is, how can you create a scenario in which more teams have a postseason opportunity to make a run at a championship, while also maintaining the uniqueness of the college football regular season? Because I think we can both agree that there is not a regular season like college football. There isn't. You can go 9-7 and still make it to the Super Bowl in the NFL. You could be an 11 seed like UCLA and make a run and get to the Final Four. It's just people don't care as much about the regular season in basketball anymore, because you have the conference championship tournament, and then you have the 64 is now a 68 team tournament. So I think that's what makes college football unique and special, and I don't want to cheapen that. That's my big thing. And I don't think that creates more parity. I think it creates less, because now you have years like 2019 where Alabama may still get in with 2 losses because they're Alabama, and then they get hot and they still win the title. So here's my proposal. You go back, you take your 5 major bowls. Okay, so I'm all due respect to the Peach Bowl, you're not a major bowl. Okay, that's a creative major bowl for the playoff.
What are the 5 major bowls?
You go to the Rose Bowl.
Okay.
The Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and the Sugar Bowl.
Okay.
The 5 Power 5 winners all get a berth to that. So the one big change I would make, so the ACC still goes to the Orange Bowl, the SEC team still gets the Sugar. The Big Ten winner now goes to the Cotton Bowl. So the Big Ten winner gets the Cotton Bowl. The Big 12 winner gets the Fiesta Bowl. And you could change this around. I'm not locked into the actual tie-ins. And then who did I leave out? So I had and the Pac-12 goes to the Rose Bowl.
Okay.
So then you have those 5 teams get the berth to your bowl game. So it's going back to the days when you grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. I'm a Northwest Ohio guy. Even though I was a Notre Dame fan, I watched Ohio State, Michigan every year. And I remember all the years where the winner has a rose in their mouth, or the ACC team has, the Sugar Bowl, and they have the oranges, or the Orange Bowl. They have the oranges and all that. When your goal was to play for the Rose Bowl, you get to the Rose Bowl, and I think bring us back to that, where you win your league, you play in the Rose Bowl. Okay, you play in the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. So you have those teams lock in their berths. After that, the committee takes the next 5 highest ranked teams in the poll, and you put them in. So you take the highest team, the ranked team would then the number 1 team would take the 10 or whatever the case may be. You'd have some kind of tie. And the only exception to that would be, I would want to avoid conference opponents as much as possible in that first round. So like if Florida's 9 and Ohio, and Wisconsin's 10, you don't have Wisconsin play Ohio State again. You don't have Florida play Alabama again, whatever the case may be.
Right.
So that would be my proposal. And then you play the playoff games, or you play the bowl games. And then from that, you take your 4. So you get back to saying, okay, so Big Ten team, you're playing for the Rose, or the Cotton Bowl. Pac-12 team, you're playing for. So what I think you do there, and there's no group of 5 tie-in. If you are one of the better teams, then you get your shot in. Now you get your shot in a bowl game as an at-large. So there's 5 conference winners and then 5 at-large teams. And I'm going to pull it up here to kind of show what that would look like. And then that's when you then go and say, from that, you pick your winners. You pick your 4 teams. Now, some people say, well, that adds too many games. Well, it doesn't add any more games for anybody compared to what they would already do with an 18 playoff.
Right.
Right? Because they're still going to add those extra games. I'm not opposed to getting rid of the conference title games in this scenario, because I think that those number 2 or number 3 teams would still have a shot. If you're good enough to be in the conference title game, and you now actually get your shot in the as an at-large team, so for example, Auburn and Georgia in 2017 played each other. Alabama's on the outside. Well, now Alabama and Georgia still get their shot, and they don't have to knock each other off now. They can now get their shot at some point in time down the road. Perhaps now you could get, the risk is there's years where maybe you could get 2 or 3 SEC teams in there. But you know what? Big 12, Big 10, ACC, get better if you don't want this to happen. So that's my proposal. And then so you again, bowl tie-ins, at-large teams, and then after those games, you pick your 4. Because the way I look at it, Bill, is now if you're a 7 seed, you've got your shot against the 4 seed, and then you're hoping. And here's why I think it would be good for college football. You still have the sanctity of the regular season is still protected. If anything, you enhance it a little bit because now these kids are playing for something other than the playoff. If you're Ohio State, who cares about the Rose Bowl anymore? No, nobody does.
No, correct.
It's all about the playoff. The other thing you do is you start to make bowls matter again, at least the bigger bowls. Because right now, if it's not a bowl tie, if it's not tied into the playoff, nobody cares except those fan bases. But here's my proposal, and I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to show mine now. So here's my proposal. This would be 2014, and some of these matchups are not sexy, right? Alabama, Arizona, who cares? But what was the big debate in 2014? Ohio State versus TCU.
Correct.
Well, now TCU gets their crack in the Cotton Bowl. They get their shot. Florida State has to prove themselves against Michigan State. Well, maybe they don't look as good. Maybe Baylor looks great and TCU smacks Ohio State, and all of a sudden Florida State, wins 17-14 over Michigan State, and all of a sudden you have all this jockeying around. Then you go to 2015. This would have been a very interesting one. So we still have the same Rose Bowl that we had that year, Iowa and Stanford. So now Stanford gets their shot to prove themselves in. Alabama, Florida State, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Michigan State versus Notre Dame. So if you're number 5 Iowa, number 6 Stanford, if you're number 7 even Ohio State, number 7 Ohio State that year has a shot to move from 7 to 4.
And something I do like about this is, okay, now we all remember that Rose Bowl where Stanford just annihilated Iowa in this game.
Mm-hmm.
It's different if I was playing for something. I don't care what anybody says.
It is.
It's like it
is.
And Michigan State, Notre Dame, that's a different game. You get to see some cool matchups like that. I don't remember this North Carolina team. What am I missing with that?
That was the team with Marquise Williams.
Oh,
they were really really high explosive team. And they would not have been competitive against Clemson, and they might not have been in it, because I think that's the year they lost to Clemson in the ACC title.
Yeah, I think Clemson hammered them in the ACC championship game, right? So that
it was somewhat competitive for a while, but that was when Clemson was making their first run. In 2016, this is what it would have looked like. So Washington made the playoff that year. Well, now they'd have to earn it, right? And we said earlier in 2016, I would contend that USC team, the way that they were playing, could have played with anybody. I mean, that was the year that Sam Darnold took over, and by the end of the year, they were looking great. Well, now they get their chance.
Yeah. Here's what I like about this year. Number one is I remember the end of year debate here was that Michigan team that lost on the spot versus Washington. A lot of Michigan fans felt like they were better than that Washington team. I'm of that opinion as well.
You mean Ohio State? They were better than Ohio State that year?
Well, they were better than Washington.
Oh, yes. I got you.
Yeah, I thought they would have beat that Washington team. No 100%. Question.
Now they get their shot.
Now they get a legit shot, and the Rose Bowl, no less. That USC-Ohio State game's fun. Penn State gets in, too, which I like because Penn State, remember, that was a fun team that lost to USC. That was one of the better Rose Bowls.
And that was a Penn State team. Now, here's the other thing I like about so the regular season still matters, but at the same time, some of those teams that maybe had an early season injury or something happened that was unique. Now you have a chance to kind of say, okay, well, they can play with anybody. Okay, go prove it. You think Georgia can do it? So we'll go
back real quick. So I'm going to try to go back to that last one. The 16 one. Here's where you could run into a problem, though. So let's say we look at this, and we're taking 4 teams at the end, right? So we're taking the 4 teams after these. What if Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan win, Clemson, and Alabama? So we have to leave out one of those Big Ten teams. And remember, they all round robined each other.
Yeah.
So but then again, one of the things that I've always liked about college football, and it still matters, the perception is reality. So then we actually have to watch these games and kind of Michigan goes out and crushes Washington. Penn State wins by a field goal. Ohio State struggles, but what do we do? And I
Right. You
think
say,
that's
well,
something.
what's the head-to-head with Michigan and Penn State? Well, Michigan beat Penn State by 39. But
Right.
here's the thing that I'm going to say, Bill, and we'll see even more of this as I cycle through. If you're a Penn State fan and you handle your business against Oklahoma, you're now going to watch before and after all the other of these games.
Right.
And that, you talk about making money. You've got all these fan bases now that are caring a lot more about that. Teams that love to hate Clemson or love to hate Ohio State or love to hate Notre Dame now have games that they can watch, and there's something on the line. This is the 2017 year. This would have been to me an interesting year as well. I would have liked to seen some of these teams play. That Auburn team, people say that was a pretty good Auburn team. They got beat by Georgia in a rematch. 2018, this would have been another interesting year for me. That 5-6 Georgia game, Ohio State game, where everybody thought Oklahoma versus Florida, that would have been an interesting game. But now Georgia and Ohio State. So Georgia, if you think you're good enough to get in with 2 losses, go handle your business against Ohio State. And if Notre Dame gets knocked off by Washington, and all of a sudden you're into the college football playoff. Or if UCF upsets Clemson, you got your shot to jump in now.
Well, and you're selling me just off the fact of, Oklahoma, Florida last year in the Sugar Bowl. I could have went to bed during, and it was fun. It didn't matter. I mean, Trask was throwing to his second string. Oklahoma to run that up. Now, if we're watching them in a Fiesta Bowl and this is going on, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Michigan team but to your point, Michigan team loses to Notre Dame and Ohio State, and they get rewarded with Alabama.
Yeah. Now you get your shot to prove that, hey, you just had a bad day against Ohio State. And look, some of these matchups are going to be bad, but I like this, Bill. I think that this really helps it, and I could not for the life of me get my 2019 one to pull up. That had some interesting ones as well. But to me, when I look at this, I just feel like my big fear as someone who loves and covers college football is I worry that we're going to, with this expansion that's basically going to be about money, and we can agree that most of the things the NCAA does is just based on what can generate, in their opinion, most revenue, and they're not exactly economists. They're looking at, well, this works, let's just keep doing that, as opposed to, well, is there a better way? Yeah, we're making $5 billion on this, but maybe if we did it a different way, we can make $8 billion. But I think it's going to really take away from what makes the regular season unique, and I think that you and I grew up in an era where we would get all these cross-country games that would happen. Ohio State used to travel. Notre Dame, Miami, growing up when there were more independent teams, you saw teams play all over the place. And if you go to these conference tie-ins and these 8-game, these 8-team playoffs, then there's even less reason for you to – because now it's like, hey, look, if you're Michigan, why would you ever schedule anyone tough out of conference? Just win against the rest of your games, and if Ohio State kills you, you're still in the top 8. You're still in the playoff. Right. If you're Georgia, why would you ever play Notre Dame or Clemson in the regular season if you're Georgia? Well, look, we got to protect ourselves, because if we lose to Alabama, then we're still okay. We can still get in. Right. We don't have to get that, because right now it's, if we're going to lose to Bama, we need to have a tough enough non-conference to where we can get in with a loss. Now it's like, no, we're fine as long as we get the SEC, because that's the way it is, right? I mean, we can agree that if you get to the SEC title game, you're going to be in an 18 playoff right now.
Right.
And I think one of the 2 teams.
Right. And we still want, you've said something a couple of times on this that has to still matter. September still has to matter, right? So we have to watch those September games. And I think one of the prisoner of the moment things with college football is they get to the point where they're like, well, this team's hot in November. Well, yeah, but why do you schedule those big games in September then? What's the point? I'm excited about, I'm trying to think of Wisconsin versus Notre Dame, for example. I forget which one got canceled. They were supposed to go to Lambeau, or
it was the Lambeau game.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it's going to be Chicago this year. It was Lambeau last year.
So
I'm not happy about, by the way.
I know, I'm the Packers fan, man. So I wanted to watch Notre Dame and Wisconsin play. I don't care. I'm not.
That's on my bucket. That was on my bucket list.
but that's
Yeah.
a great game to watch. So you
Yeah.
want those to matter. And like you said, we grew up in this era where, I have a 10-year-old son. You try to explain to him, well, there was a split national title that year between Georgia Tech and
Mm-hmm.
Washington, and he's just looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we want to preserve that regular season, and I think we don't want to water it down. I mean, one of the
Right.
things I was wrong about, I didn't like the NFL's playoff expansion, but then I kind of watched Wild Card Weekend. I kind of liked it,
Mm-hmm.
but long term, you're thinking, you know, as a Packers fan, of course, I want them to have that first round bye. So two got teams having a bye works. So that 16
Mm-hmm.
plan works in the NFL, doesn't work in college.
Right. And I just think the number 9 team, as we've seen in the NFL, the number 9 or 10 team that gets in the playoff to me, the talent disparity between the number 1 and the number 10 in the NFL is much, 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 much closer than it is in college football. And I think that's always been true. I don't know if we can, at least not in my lifetime, where we could ever looked at the number 8 or 9 team in the country and said, yeah, that team could go out and beat so and so. I mean,
Right.
2005, is anybody that's not in the top 4? Is anyone other than maybe Ohio State, maybe Notre Dame, maybe Penn State that year beating Texas or USC? Maybe.
Maybe,
You
maybe.
know, I mean,
Right.
Ohio State gave Texas a game that year, and Penn State beat Ohio State, and Notre Dame gave USC a game, but it stops at 5 and occasionally 6.
Right.
And I don't even know if some of those teams are good enough to then, maybe you knock a team off in round 1, but then you're getting beaten round 2. Or those teams, but that's fine because that still shakes things up enough to where it's worth it to expand it to a degree, but not to expand it in a way in which we cheapen the regular season and then the bowl games even more.
Well, and
And that's my fear.
I fight with Mike DeCourcy, our college basketball writer, about this all the time. And he, for my money, Mike is the best college basketball writer in the country. He's been doing it for, he's been at 31 Final Fours. But when we argue about this 18 thing, and there's a couple of those on Sporting News, his is very cookie cutter, what we're talking about. I kind of look at it different because I don't think basketball, you can't compare the NCAA basketball tournament to the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't do it. There's 68 teams. And yeah, a team goes on a run, but Gonzaga to me was the best team. And then they get to the championship game, they get blasted. So Baylor was pretty darn good too. But football, more often than not, college football, for all this arguing we do back and forth and all the things we do, more often than not, they get the best teams in the championship game. And they found a way to do that in the 14 playoff. I mean, there's been surprises, but the last 2 years in particular, you and I were texting through it, a couple of them. Nobody was beating Alabama, man. Nobody was beating LSU the year before the way Joe Burrow was playing in that offense either. So, we just got to protect that without the biggest fear of me to 8 is then they'll start wanting more to 12. And then 2, that it'll just water down a product that I enjoy a lot.
Right. That's my big thing is you're going to cheapen the regular season. And this notion of comparing the NCAA tournament, somebody had a graphic up where if you actually go back and look at the last 10, 12 years, the same number of teams that won the NCAA tournament have won the college football tournament. I mean, it's still like 6 or 7 teams. And the other aspect of it is basketball and football are completely different sports. Basketball is a sport. I'll tell you an example, and this is what I had a parent of a 5-star football recruit one time ask me why his son doesn't get the same level of national exposure as a 5-star basketball recruit. And I said, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the primary one is that basketball recruit could go to Oregon State, and all of a sudden Oregon State's an NCAA tournament team. Your son could go to Oregon State, and they're still going to suck. Basketball is just a different animal, and it's more of a team sport from the standpoint of also that you can have a team like Loyola Chicago that's a very experienced team, and they play a bunch of young team. The dynamics are different. Alabama's not loaded with a bunch of freshmen, really talented 5-star freshmen that are starting. They're still every year a very veteran team. It's just such a different dynamic that it's just kind of pointless. And it's to me, it's trying to make a cheap point. Oh, look, they expanded the tournament and it's been better for the game. Has it? If we just took the top 32 teams, how many teams outside the top 32? Because it didn't used to be 32, right?
Right.
How many teams outside the top 32 have actually won a title? The number is very small. Very small. I think UConn might have been.
UConn and a Villanova, that might be it.
Right. It's very small. I mean, at the end of the day, But the other aspect of it too is you can play 4 basketball games in a week. You can't.
Right.
I mean, it's a different sport. I just think that's a cheap point. I think there should never ever be comparison. Well, basketball has a big tournament. Well, so does Division III.
Right.
But they play 10 regular season games. So if you want to go down to, you got to look, if Mount Union wants to win a national title, they got to win 15 games. Right? It's a completely different animal, though.
The more they want to expand, the more they're going to have to lop off of the regular season especially with the safety concerns. Not to mention that with everything else going on in college sports, these guys, you're going to hear a lot. I mean, we live in a world where they were actually discussing trying to have 2 seasons in the same calendar year.
Right. Which is insane.
That was not going to happen with college athletes that aren't getting paid and risking their NFL future. So,
so let me ask you, you've mentioned player safety a couple times. That could mean a lot of different things. What are you referring to when you talk about player safety?
The less number of games. Like, I don't understand why the NFL went to 17.
Right. Well,
I don't
understand why.
Well, I understand why, but you can't sell that you're trying to make your product safer when you're going to play more games, right? And especially for college athletes, there's a couple things they're kind of off the wall. I'm getting off track here a little bit, but there shouldn't be more than 15 games in a season for a college football team.
Agree. Now,
I mean, I think 15 is probably my cap.
15 is there's only be 2 teams that would play more than 15 in my scenario, and the reason that I have a little difference of opinion of this is because there is a break. Because college football does get a break. So if you play your conference title game on December 5th, you now have basically a month off until January 1 when, you'd have, because to me, in my scenario, all the games are played like, January, 31st and the 1st or something like that. If you can get them all in on the 1st, that's fine. But, maybe you split it over 2 days. You get a month off. You're going to be fresher. You're going to be healed. Guys are going to come back from injury. So I don't think it has the same level of wear and tear that you would think if you just say 16 games. Because in the NFL, you may get a bye week in week 3, and then you've got to play 16 straight games.
Fair.
It's a little different animal. Plus, a lot of the postseason is happening while kids aren't in school anymore. So more access to trainers, more access to, you're not walking across campus to go to class. I mean, it's a little different for me. So I don't think the extra game, because of the timing of it, changes it a whole lot. I also don't think it impacts their NFL because it only pushes it. Look, if you're going to go to an 18 playoff, you're going to play the same number of games as you would if you did it the way that I want to do it. And I'm not opposed to lumping off a regular season game. Why does Alabama need to play, Mercer?
Oh, those games, they've got to go as part of both of our plans.
Yeah,
we don't need
100%.
As much as I love my MAC football, we don't need Kent at Ohio State. We don't need Michigan versus.
We don't need as much of them. I can live with some of those games. So, like I've said before,
they have to have a paycheck game or 2. I get that, but we don't need. There's so many games on a Saturday.
What I would do with the FCS games is you can only play an FCS team if one of 2 criteria is met. Number 1, they're an in-state school. Because the reality is that is a way to get money reallocated to some of the smaller schools in your system, right? Because a lot of these public schools are in part of a system. The other one is you want to schedule a team that finished in the top 25 last year, go for it.
Right.
That would be my thing. Because you're at least playing a decent team. If Kansas State wants to schedule North Dakota State, that's your funeral. You know what I mean? But we don't need Georgia playing Savannah. Wasn't it like Savannah State when they were on like an 80-game losing streak or some absurd thing like that? We don't need that nonsense.
Our fantasy writers in his parents went to North Dakota State, so he's always saying everybody's ducking us. And I'm like, he's got a point because, I mean, you got to make sure that you're scheduling properly. But I think all of those things, your plan, I'm going to admit when we discussed this before I came on, we discussed this the other day. I wasn't about your plan, Brian. I was like, that's not going to work, but you've explained it in great detail and I'm sold on it. I don't think they'll do it. Like they won't do mine, but I'm sold on it. It's better. I think it's better than some of these cookie cutter plans that people are going to end up hating.
I think just jumping to an 18 playoff is lazy and it's going to crush the game. And look, the NCAA and ESPN and all that, they're already pushing for things that are hurting the game.
Right.
The transfer rule. I mean, there's so many things that they're advocating for to just say, well, let's just do this when you're not really taking into consideration the overall impact that this is going to have on the game. And to say, so maybe we can get you on one of these days to have a conversation about the transfer rule. That might be an interesting one because I have a very strong take on that. But to me, it's just it's amazing to me that people that profit so much off of this game make so many decisions that hurt this game. And ESPN being the to me the biggest driver of that, because they look at it and think an extra week of playoff games. Think of the money we're going to make. Well, now nobody cares about your September games that you're airing. Now nobody cares about the conference title game that you're playing, other than the fan bases of those two teams. I mean, do you think the number 10 team's thinking, "Ooh, gee, I hope that Wisconsin loses to Ohio State so we can jump up to number 8 and get killed by Alabama in the first round, or get killed by Clemson in the first round"? I mean, it's not going to do it. Now all of a sudden that Purdue Ohio State game doesn't matter. That Notre Dame losing a game to Georgia in a regular season. Notre Dame's in a win now mode the rest of the year. They have to win now in 2017. And that to me is what makes the college football exciting. And I'm just afraid that they're going to make decisions that are going to ruin that. If you want to expand it, fine, expand it, but you just got to be smart about doing it the right way. In this way, now there's, instead of 4 games in the first round that have an impact. I mean, I think in all those scenarios in which we showed, Bill, where we talked about the bowl games, I don't think there was maybe but 1 or 2 bowl games that don't have some level of impact where this game doesn't matter. They all 5 have some level of impact. Even if it's a 1 versus a 10, you're still watching that, crossing your fingers, thinking, because a number 10 team, depending on who it is, may be good enough to upset an Alabama or a Clemson. Maybe. Maybe, or at least play well enough to the number 4 team. So if you're the number 5 seed and you blow out the number 18, but the number 9 team gives the number 4 team a game and wins by field goal, maybe that's enough for you to jump you up to number 4. So you're going to watch that game. I just think it'd be a lot of fun. And that's the big thing is what can we do to keep college football fun? Because this is a game that you and I both love. So when do you think this is going to happen, Bill? Do you think this is going to happen in the next 2-3 years, or do you think they're going to push it back a little bit further? I know there's contractual stuff. They can get out of that.
They can, and I think when they do, that'll be something that 2026 is like that year that everybody points to, because they're going to need to do it logistically and plan for it. And every time I talk to Bill Hancock, who is an awesome guy, I love talking to Bill. He has great insight, and he's kind of like of me. Is like, as of 4 is good. I mean, how can you complain about undefeated LSU versus undefeated Clemson, or undefeated Alabama versus undefeated Ohio State? I mean, other than Ohio State had to play a weird schedule because of COVID. How if it's next year and it's the 2 best teams I mean, you're just looking for. You use the word lazy. I think that's a perfect description of what we're trying to do by pushing it to 8. If you're going to do it right, leave it, make it absolutely bulletproof, so we don't have to talk about going to 12 or 16. Because then college football won't be what we want it to be.
No. Yeah, that may lead us to another conversation of. Last thing for me, what I would also do is if you want to expand it even more, if I was football king for a day, I'm getting rid of, you can't have more than 10 teams in a conference. We're bringing back the Southwest Conference. We're bringing back the Big East. We're kicking Nebraska back to the Big 8 where they belong, and we're gonna make some changes. I think that'd be even more fun. Then you could do more conference tie-ins. You could have Southwest versus Big 8 in a bowl game.
And then and I don't want to get too far off track, but I almost go the other way. I said, if we accept the fact that the Power 5 and the Group of 5 are different entities, that the Group of 5 is never going to play for a national, there's not a Group of 5. I still don't think there's a Group of 5 team that would have won a national championship. So let's just do 64 teams as the Power 5, and you split them up and do 4 super conferences.
So are you kicking Notre Dame out?
No, I'm keeping Notre Dame.
Notre Dame be part of isn't it 64 plus Notre Dame?
It's 64 plus Notre Dame and BYU, basically. Okay, so we've got 66. Yeah. So I've got to find 2 schools to kick out.
I can think of a couple currently in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I've got 2 in mind. But then we have to make it 4 super conferences
Mhm.
and move some teams around and do what you need to do, and then but again, that's not perfect because like you said, you're gonna have teams not play each other.
Well, let me kick this to you. If you're going to go with basically, say 64 teams, we'll go 64. We'll kick a couple teams out. 64. My math isn't great, but 64 divided by 8 is 8, right?
Mhm.
And they won an 18 playoff,
8
8
division
conferences of
champions.
8.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about it is if you're going to still play 11, 12 games, think of the non-conference games that we're going to have in that scenario.
Right.
If you're only playing
Right.
7 regular season games and we're playing 11 games, think of the non-conference schedules that we would have to have in those scenarios.
Right.
That'd be a lot of fun.
It would be, and that's what we look for. I mean, and again, the sport with the expansion and all the moving parts has taken away things like Oklahoma, Nebraska, and I mean, even Notre Dame last year. Notre Dame got a taste of the conference life, and I know you've probably talked at that at length. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a
Mhm.
cool experiment, but a part of me still misses, or I don't even know when the next one's scheduled. Notre Dame, Michigan isn't scheduled forever. Notre Dame,
It's for a
USC,
while.
you've got to have that on the schedule.
Yeah,
Right.
it
So,
was weird not having Notre Dame. I would have rather had Notre Dame USC than seeing Notre Dame in a conference title game. But that's just because of what I grew
right.
up on.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's fine.
we
So
didn't
I
see
think
Ohio State and Michigan this year. That was
that's
awful.
so
Although
very
it would have been a
bizarre.
bloodbath. That
It
was
would not have
weird.
been close. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I
It was a
mean,
cool novelty thing, Notre Dame in the conference. It was a cool novelty thing, but it's not something that I would necessarily but I would be okay if they did get rid of the NCAA and they just made the Power 5 team just kind of broke off and started their own thing. I'd be fine Notre Dame having to join a league in that circumstance because it would kind of start
right.
things
Like
over from scratch a little bit.
if it was like a real NFL light, and I'm cool with
Mhm.
that idea because at least we've
Right.
got the best teams playing.
Right. And it would to me, I mean, I used to be against that, Bill, to be honest with you, because I'm very much a traditionalist in a lot of
Right.
ways, but I've just
Right.
been so disgusted the last decade by things that the NCAA has done that I'm done with the NCAA at this
Right.
point in time. I mean, they serve no function except to organize tournaments at this point
Right.
in time. I mean, it's just some of the decisions they made. You're gonna negate 21 Notre Dame wins because they found out something was going on that they didn't sanction and they dealt with it, and yet North Carolina's running fake
Right.
classes and then nothing happens. You know what I mean? It's just such a
Right.
joke of an organization. I mean, some guys get, the transfer thing is here because of the stupid things they've done in the past that have made it challenging and just made it such a stupid rule. The NIL thing is happening because they've been so stupid about their protection of amateurism, which I actually believe in protecting amateurism, but I think you've defined it in such a stupidly narrow manner that you're taking a kicker from some team who's making money off of a YouTube channel that has nothing to do with them playing football, and you're saying you can't do that. And those are the things that they've done, and that's why I don't have a lot of faith that they're going to actually now make the right decision for it, because it's going to be a decision that's driven strictly by one thing, and that is, what do we think can generate the most money in the easiest
Right.
fashion? And that's where we're at. So, Bill,
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this tremendously. I'm gonna chat with you a little bit off the air about a couple other topics that I'm curious to get your opinion on, that I think we might have a difference of opinion about, which would be fun
Right.
to discuss. Because I think the unique thing is you and I come at this from such a different backgrounds. Like, we're both in the same profession now, but
Right.
you've been a writer. I came from a coaching, playing background, and I think those can make for some really interesting conversations
Sure.
about that. So, but this has been a lot of fun. I think both of the proposals we came up with would be better than what they're ultimately going to do. I think we can definitely agree on that.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So we got that right.
yeah. So, Bill, thanks so much. If give the people a quick heads up on where they can find you, because look, I follow Bill on Twitter. I read his stuff. This is not hype. This is something I've admitted to my audience before. Bill does a great job. Very fair. If you're a Notre Dame fan who thinks the national media hates Notre Dame, give Bill a read, because he's always been very fair to Notre Dame. So, Bill, let the people know where they can find your work on Twitter and obviously your website.
Yeah, I'm at Bill Bender 92 at sportingnews.com, and it was a pleasure being on here. It's like I said, I always tell people the story that when you grow up in Central Ohio and you go to a Catholic school, inevitably my wedding, the best part of my wedding, aside from getting married, of course, she's in bed, I hope, was my groomsmen were comprised of a couple Buckeye fans, a Michigan State grad, a Notre Dame grad, and a Michigan fan. So the night before, we went to a bar, and I always tell it this way. We went to a bar. My wife and all her bridesmaids are there. And I think it was the Michigan State grad. He spoke up and said something like, Joe Montana's overrated, right? And it was just like 10 voices at once, and we're all screaming at each other. And I was like, you really told a bunch of Catholic school boys that Montana. And then Kimberly just goes, I'll see you in the morning. Make sure you're at the aisle. So, we always had fun with that story.
Yeah.
But we love football here, and enjoyed this, and let's do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, Bill. For all of you Notre Dame fans, make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell so that you get all of our latest podcasts. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you get it. And, of course, as always, you see it down there scrolling, irishbreakdown.com. Check it out. We got a lot coming up, a lot of breakdowns, a lot of analysis, a lot of things going on, and, of course, tons of recruiting. So, Bill Bender, thanks for joining us. The rest of y'all, we will talk to you again very, very soon.